Welcome. This is Soothing Whispers ASMR. As always, if there are any sounds or words you would like to hear me perform, please leave them below in the comments. Today, I thought we could continue reading Aimee Bender's The Third Elevator, which is a beautiful fairy tale. If by chance you missed the first reading that I did from this story, or if you just want a refresher, that video will be linked down below in the video description. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Third Elevator by Aimee Bender. One of the miners, who regularly filled up the gold elevator and was considered one of the best workers, had watched the logger go up the elevator with curiosity and envy. He hadn't known a person could take that trip. He'd been growing short of breath lately. So, a few hours after the logger had left, the miner told his workmates that he was going to follow that logger and get in the elevator when half the load was full, because he had to see the top of the earth again, or he was going to die of claustrophobia of the lungs. The miners were a supportive team, because they had to be, or they'd all be dead, and so they let him hop inside the gold elevator right before it went up, watching the doors close over his nervous face, cheeks reflecting the piles of metal as if he'd been working for years in sunshine. The doors opened up to that same small lobby, with the other two elevators opening at the same time. Gold spilled onto the ground, and so did the miner. There were no other human visitors, no sign of that vagabond logger. The miner stepped forward, squinting from the brightness of the glare, even though it was early evening, 5 p.m., and the sunlight was cool and lazy. Since he was an honest man, he did not take a nugget of gold, but walked out the glass side doors of the lobby, strolling into the surrounding forest. Nearby, he could hear the melodic whistling of the loggers, but saw none of them. He breathed in the oxygen thickly, heady from it, and settled himself under a tree. The woods smelled like heaven to the miner, so warm and rich with sun, and he ate some nuts from his pocket and then fell asleep in oxygenated air for the first time in over 20 years. The loggers found him as they moved to that part of the forest. It was immediately clear that he wasn't a logger, being that he was covered with tiny black and gold specks from the mine, and so they hauled him, sound asleep, into the elevator with their stacks of wood. He woke up in the lobby again, amidst a pile of timber and lumber. The sun was brighter now, and he squinted helplessly at the light. He was hoping to spot the logger from the mine as a guide, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The miner rubbed his eyes. He wasn't sure where to go, so he decided to take the elevator he hadn't been in up, up and up and up. He huddled close to the walls. It had been a long time since he'd experienced anything unexpected, and he wasn't familiar with this constant rising motion, and his heart kept bumping against his throat. When the feather doors opened to sky, the opposite of his life until now, as if he were face to face with the sun, the miner forgot to breathe. He stood there with the clouds and the birds in the air, speechless. Amen to the firmament, his arms full to the rim of it. birds. He'd forgotten all about birds. Flew by at face level, wings steady, and the miner laughed out loud at those amazing wingspans. He dazzled his eyes with the brightness of the blue, tears streaming down his cheeks as he clung to those warm feather walls. Who knew there was this kind of ridiculous beauty just a quarter-mile above the mine? He thought of his men, his favorites, 55 stories below in darkness, taking chunks out of the earth so that people could decorate their wrists and necks and ankles and fingers. He had to tell them. He had to bring them there, one by one, up to the sky. He wanted them to feel how he felt, to see the birds in such detail, the flash of beaks. He wanted them to breathe in the silver of this gourmet air. After another 20 glorious minutes and a full rotational view, the elevator went down. The miner hopped out and waited at the gold elevator patiently, and when it opened, full of gold as always, he jumped in it and sank those 10 floors. There were his friends, exactly as before, still in the black mining hole, still surrounded by nuggets of gold, a couple of them eating those pre-made salami sandwiches bought from the miners' restaurant deeper inside the cave. They looked a little surprised to see their adventurous friend again. "Come with me," said the miner. "You'll never guess how incredible it is. You will never guess what is up there." They all wanted to know before they came. The miner wouldn't tell. All he said was how beautiful it was. He couldn't stop babbling. "Come up," he said, wiping his eyes. No one wanted to. "It'll be cold up there," said one. "I'm beat," said another miner, curling up in his space on the floor with his gold-dusted pillow and book. "It's incredible," said the adventurous miner. "I must show you. Come with me. Come now." "Tell us," said the other miners. "Then maybe." So the adventurous miner sat down and told of the forest smell of dampness and the crisp air and photosynthesis. And then he told of the feather elevator and the ascent into the sky and the air again, how it was singing air like they'd never breathed before, how the birds' wings were so close he could have touched one with a careful finger, and how the feathers would remind them what the word soft meant. They listened and nodded, but after all that, only one other miner said he felt like going right then. The others had plans to play poker 7-card stud. They said they liked the description and thanked him, but explained that they wanted to get a good night's sleep after the game. The miner went and shook them by the shoulders, but they still said no. Hey, really, thanks anyway. He banged his fist on the rocky wall, which drew blood, but the poker dealer still began shuffling, and the players divvied up the chips, carefully cut from the wall, and after a few more stunned minutes, he took the younger fellow with him in the elevator, 10 floors up, into the lobby. "You're the only smart one in there," he said, blotting his bloody fist on his pant leg. "I'm real bad at poker," admitted the younger man. Both miners were relieved by the cool night light that was filling the lobby now that the sun was down. The miner wanted to show his friend everything, but he wanted to go to the best part first, and so they went straight to the feather elevator, and the doors opened and they stepped inside. As soon as their feet were in, the doors shut and it began to rise again, 45 floors up. The miners held on to each other's shoulders. I believe I'm afraid of heights, the younger one said. The adventurous miner squeezed the shoulders of his friend. It's worth it, he said. The elevator smelled of bird seed. The miner put his cheek close to the feathers. The younger miner was starting to hyperventilate from the endless rising and rising, when finally the elevator steadied to a stop. Ready? Said the first. His friend nodded weakly, holding his stomach. The doors opened. The sky was nearly black by now, with stars poking out in tiny white glittering dots. The moon gleamed at half. The adventurous miner had not seen night in those same 20 years. His whole skin bumped up. He felt he should bow, but he didn't want to lower his head. He wanted to keep looking and breathing and looking. After a few minutes, he glanced at his younger friend, jittery with the nervousness that comes from sharing something deeply precious. The air was filling him up. He was tempted to try to fly. Well, he said, unable to keep his voice casual, so what do you think? His friend was scratching his head. His breathing had regulated, but he looked puzzled. But it's just like the cave, he said then, pointing to the stars. Just a whole lot bigger, and it has silver, not gold. I wouldn't want to be a miner here, he said. It would take such a long shovel. The adventurous miner was taking so many deep breaths, he was starting to get dizzy himself. It's no cave, he said. Don't say that. His friend shrugged. Looks just like the cave to me, he said. Doesn't feel high at all. He sat at the edge of the box and dangled his legs. The miner crossed his arms. When he spoke, his voice trembled. I'm showing you the whole night sky, he said, eyes filling, and all you have to say for it is that it looks like the cave. The younger miner didn't look around. The elevator was rotating very slowly. See, he said, pointing. If we got that thing, he said, pointing at the moon, which was just coming into their frame of vision, that would fill up the elevator in one day. Now that would be an easy day. The older miner's head was spinning. He thought quite honestly of pushing the man off the elevator with his foot, kicking him into the air, this man he had spent the last 20 years working with, side by side, gone in a slim fall. 2 swans flew by, bodies lit like opals against the moonlight. The older miner watched their long wings and started to cry. I've spent my whole life down there, he said. The other man was asleep. When they descended, the miner lugged him out of the feather elevator and stuffed him back in the gold one. The doors shut and down he went, but he himself stayed in the lobby. He slept a long night there on the tiled floor, face pressed to the glass, knees pulled in, a heavy spool of unraveling in his chest. He woke only once in the middle of the night to notice the swan settled next to him, wings tucked up. The cloud nestled close to its father. By this point it was confused. It had taken so many trips with the swan down the elevator that it thought it belonged on the ground as well, and spent hours floating 1 inch above dirt level, amiable beside its paternal line. That night it slept beside the man and the bird, buoyant, earthbound. The swan woke up, slightly nervous, because his child was thinning and dissipating, and no longer had the robust look of a healthy cloud. His child now looked vague and closer to the curtainy veil of stratus than its usual bouncy alto cumulus self. "Child," he said in the middle of the night, in a low voice so as not to wake the sleeping man next to him with the glowing face, "I think you should go back up there and stay there for a while. You belong higher in the atmosphere. I will look at you from down here with such pride and joy," he said. The cloud didn't talk, but moved 1 inch closer to the swan's side. The swan repeated himself. The cloud moved closer. The swan stood and took the cloud up with him back to the 45th floor, and there they looked out to the world at sunrise, turning lighter and more colorful with each minute, each shade emerging from the darkness, blue first, then green, red last, and brightest of all, applause. The swan asked the cloud to go back out into the air. The cloud didn't move. The swan tried to shove it out, but it is impossible to shove a cloud. Finally, they took the elevator back down 45 stories. The cloud was spreading into a fog now. The swan picked at the feathers around his breastbone. It was still early morning, and the glowing miner was asleep, still glowing. There was a knock on the glass of the lobby, and the swan saw his wife, the bluebird. She skipped inside, kissed the vast area of her firstborn, and told her husband that she'd laid another egg. The swan blinked, surprised. She said this egg was different, very large and pale green. "What do you think it'll be?" he asked the bluebird nervously, tendrils of cloud swirling on his back. She shrugged her winged shoulders. "A bird?" she said. In the morning, all the letters had blown away except one with the return address that read King and Queen on the first line and Palace on the second. The logger, still tired and ill, cleared his eyes and opened the letter. On gold-embossed stationery it read, "Dear citizen, I am pleased to say you have been selected to be one of the palace courtiers. Please show up at work on Tuesday at 8 a.m. sharp, and you need not bring anything except this letter. In fact, please don't." The logger held the letter to his nose. It smelled like flowers, and when he looked closer, he saw that the paper itself was made from hammered-down gardenias, dried into paper stiffness, the smell still caught inside an olfactory photograph. So the logger showed up on Tuesday at the palace door, which was huge and had no handles. When he was ushered in, he said he was a new courtier, and they asked to see the letter, and he showed it, and everyone nodded solemnly. "Welcome," said the man with the voice so deep it reverberated in the logger's ribcage. They tried to take away his axe. He refused. "Sometimes," he explained, "I need to cut things down." They murmured for a while and checked with several levels of authority and then said okay. "But if you get anywhere near the king or queen's neck with that," they said in unison, "we will bomb your ass into oblivion." The logger nodded meekly. They sent him to the kitchen to make turtle soup. The kitchen was a huge brassy room with hanging copper pots and pans and piles of white linen tablecloths and a chef with a curling red mustache. The logger was placed at the stove near a line of sleeping turtles. His job was to pick up each turtle and stick it into a cauldron of boiling water because the king had requested turtle soup. As might be expected, the logger could not do it. The minute he put the first sleeping turtle in the water and thought he heard a squeak of death so sharp it made his blood curdle into sleet, he fell down, axe and all, and the one turtle boiled, and the chef's assistants had to leave their chopping to the chef's annoyance, and take the new guy down to the infirmary. There, the nurses were doves and fluttered around, checking his temperature. I can do no job, the logger said to the air. I can touch nothing. The doves, 11 in total, nestled into his neck, cooing and soft as breasts, a curved warmth against his carotid artery. He slept like that, and when he woke up he felt much better, renewed, and he sent a prayer up to the dead turtle, and his heart seemed to be working steadily. But when he swung his legs out of bed and got ready to go back into the world to find his ever-elusive fate, he discovered that his axe had disappeared, and all the doves were gone. The infirmary was empty. It was perfectly clean and organized and tidy, but nothing alive except for him was in it. He busted out of the infirmary door into the hallway. "Excuse me," he said. "Nurse?" The hallway was silent. The carpet was a rich purple, and the candles hanging from the walls were dripping elongated beaded tears of ivory wax. The logger began to panic. He spied a purple carpeted stairway at the end of the hall, and rushed up several flights until he reached a door embossed with gold, and he didn't even read the lettering but just charged right on through. These were the chambers of the royal barber, and inside the king was sitting on a white chair, covered in a white apron, having his white hair cut. "Have you seen my axe?" cried the logger. The king looked embarrassed. The barber's scissors glinted in the light, encrusted with sapphires. On the floor in the distance, the logger spotted a couple of fat rats. "Who is this?" the king asked his nearby courtiers. "You know I don't like to be watched by strangers when my hair is being cut." They had no idea who it was. "I was in the infirmary," said the logger. "Have you seen the doves? I was a courtier for an hour," he said, "but I couldn't cook the turtles for the turtle soup. I need my axe. Where are those doves?" The courtiers, in a group, shrugged. The one with the severe eyebrows looked guiltily at the logger because she knew those doves tended to cause a fair amount of trouble at the infirmary. They were great nurses in daylight, but at night seemed to have a problem with kleptomania. She explained this to the logger, whose face blanched paler each minute. "Where can I find them?" he said. "They do enjoy riding that feather elevator," she said. The king, patient up until now because the barber had been cutting some bangs, opened his mouth and ordered the young man out. "Just for that," he bellowed, "I would like more turtle soup tonight. Vats and vats of turtle soup." He was in a bad mood. His wife's good friend the swan had been gone for weeks, and she was moody, and he couldn't comfort her, and now the barber had just cut one side of his hair too short. The barber had been distracted by starting to tell his own story of being in the infirmary and getting his fingernails stolen by the doves. So daintily he had not even noticed until he raised his finger up to nibble on the nail and found there was nothing there but skin. It was very gross, he said now, but no one was listening. The logger was being shoved out by the courtiers through the front door of the palace into the daytime. There he faced the kingdom for the first time without his axe. He felt small and odd. He walked, both arms free, all the way to the glass lobby and stood trembling by the third elevator. There was no button, so he just waited. Everything around him seemed dizzyingly tall. The outside doors of the elevator smelled musty, and the feathers were graying. Within a minute the doors opened, Inside he found a big white swan and a dirty man from the mine standing solemnly together inside a veil of fog. 3 sets of blinks: logger blink, miner blink, swan blink. Clouds don't blink. "Oh, it's you," said the miner at last. "We met in the mine. I was wondering when I'd bump into you up here." The logger nodded. He was staring at the miner, who he didn't recognize. The man's face was radiant, trumpets and playing sad marches beneath his skin. He had not seen a single man who looked like that in the mine, and he would have remembered. "I'm looking for my axe," he said. "Seen any doves around here?" The miner didn't respond. Next to him, the swan was trying to pull part of the thinning bluish fog onto its back. "Come on, honey," he said. "Come on." The miner tried to pick up the fog and put it on the swan's back, but his hands went straight through. Useless. He turned back to the logger. "This elevator appears to be broken," he said. "Are you a repairman?" "No," said the logger. "Can you be a repairman?" "No," said the logger. "All I do is chop things down. I'm the exact opposite of a repairman." "Well, we need to get this cloud back to the sky," said the swan. "It's of dire importance. It's too thin to sit on my back any more, so I can't fly it up." "Come on my back," the swan said again to the fog. "Come on, baby." "That's no cloud," said the logger, and the swan hung his neck in shame. The miner glared. "Can't you see?" he said. "That's not very helpful." The logger stepped into the elevator. "You sure you haven't seen any doves?" he asked again. The swan began whispering to the walls of the elevator in bird language, the words mysteriously lengthened and choppy at the same time. And the elevator seemed to creak and listen, but its doors did not shut, and nothing moved upward. The cloud was so thin now it filled the whole elevator, filling the air with a bluish whiteness that made it hard to see, like living in the interior of a pearl. Only the swan's black beaded eyes shone through, wet and glassy and wretched with guilt. The 3 of them stood there, waiting for something to happen. The logger kept flexing his hands. The miner's eyes were closed, remembering. The cloud's vagueness began moving into the lobby itself now. "Shut the lobby doors," ordered the swan. "Hurry, we can't let it get any thinner than the size of the lobby." The miner ran to the glass doors on either end and shut both firmly. Off cue, the bark elevator opened and released a few logs on the ground, like an awkward phrase spoken out of turn at a party by a guest no one is listening to. "I need my axe," the logger cried out. The agitation was growing in his palms. The swan was weeping openly now, his child the size of the whole lobby. The miner picked up a log and leaned his nose into the wood, breathing in the smell elemental. "Hey," he said to the logger, "those doves did come by. They had an axe, a watch, some gold nuggets, I think a tiny mink coat. Anyway, they flew by, but when they saw the elevator was broken, they left to go somewhere else." The logger's jaw dropped. "You saw the doves?" he said. "This was hours ago," said the miner. "They're long gone." "They had my axe," said the logger, "and some fur, and gold, and a watch. They're set for a while, those doves." The logger's heart sank like a rock. The swan stepped out of the elevator, neck low and broken as an old daisy stem, and now that all 3 were out of it, standing in the lobby, covered in mist and fog, the feather elevator doors closed with a whir, and it began its rise up. "No, wait," cried the swan, but it was too late. The feather elevator was already ascending, the box replaced by a pole in their line of vision. The elevator stayed up for 10 hours, and the swan would not let the miner or the logger leave the lobby through the side doors because he didn't want his cloud child to dissipate further. "We're stuck here forever," said the swan. "I'm sorry to have to tell you both that, but if you try to leave, I will peck out your eyes." The logger stared at the pole of the feather elevator. The miner wanted to go back to the sky. The logger suggested he take the other elevator, but the miner didn't want to. "I'm waiting for that," he said, pointing up. The logger didn't know where to go. He could not go back down to the mine where they hated him, or to the forest where he was a shame on his father's name. So he sat down. The swan was moving down his feathers, one at a time. The fog was still thick enough to make the logger sleepy, so he curled up on the hard tile and closed his eyes. And with that, we shall leave the rest for another night. As always, I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful night. Sweet dreams.